Welcome to the Career Success Secret Show. I am your host, Mike Tomasello. In today's episode, we are going to continue the previous episode, The Ultimate Resume Blueprint, how to build a resume that lands interviews. So this is part 2 of the series. If you are listening to this episode and you haven't listened to episode 1 or part 1 of The Ultimate Resume Blueprint, please stop listening to this one, go back and listen to the first episode, because the concepts we are talking about in this episode are going to build off of part 1. Also, if you have not implemented what you learned in part 1 as much as possible, I also encourage you to go back and listen to the episode. So as with all things, I encourage you to print out your resume and have your resume in front of you as you're listening to the episode so that you can take notes right on the resume in terms of what you might want to change. And also, it's going to help you just to understand better how far away you are from sort of the ideal, what ideas might need to change and stuff like that. So the more you do that, the better off you're going to be. I also want to shout out some listeners today. So we're going to do something slightly different than we have in the past. Normally, we shout out our top 3 countries, our top 3 states, and our top 3 cities for listeners. We want to do something a little bit different this week, and we want to shout out some countries and some cities that we haven't necessarily shout out before. Quick shout out to our listeners in Canada, France, Russia, and Ireland. Yes, we are growing internationally. We love our international listeners. And we want to shout out some cities like thank you listeners in Chicago, thank you listeners in Milton, Florida, and last but not least, thank you listeners in El Segundo, California. All right, going back to the Ultimate Resume Blueprint, part 2. We're going to talk about a concept, lead with impact, not duties. Lead with impact, not duties. Most people, especially if you haven't had your resume done in a really long time or haven't updated it in a really long time, this is one of the number one areas where people are lacking in their resume. You think you're selling yourself appropriately, like maybe you've even done the exact job you're applying for before, and so you assume that people are going to look at it and that they're going to want to hire you. Well, here's the dealio. The dealio is you are competing against hundreds and hundreds of other people. We talked about this in part 1, but it bears repeating. You're competing against hundreds and hundreds of other applicants, many of whom who have already done the job before. So when they are having to split hairs and look very closely at the slight nuances between resumes, the people that come off as superstars and the people who come off as having an impact are going to be more likely to get the interview than people who just show up and say, I did the job, or I did the responsibilities. So how do you lead with impact over duties? Well, it's fairly simple, but it might take a little legwork on your part if you're not used to it. You're going to focus on achievements. You're going to focus on achievements, metrics, awards. Now, if you're like, Mike, I'm in a role that doesn't have a lot of achievements, or I'm in a role that's hard to quantify, I would challenge you to say, well, it might be harder for you, but that doesn't mean that it can't be done. If you have worked as a janitor, there is a way to quantify your job. If you have worked as a restaurant server or McDonald's for minimum wage, there is a way to quantify what you've done, quantify the volume, the number of people that you worked the cash register for over a weekly period or a monthly period. There are always ways to quantify at least some of the things that you did during your job. So I want to put that out there. The other tip that I would give you is go on LinkedIn and search for your old coworkers who were in the same job or similar jobs to you. Go and look at your boss's profile and see what are the achievements that they're taking credit for, and say, hey, was I on the team or was I part of the department that contributed to that? If you were, and at least some of your work contributed to that overall result, then you get to take partial credit for it. You are part of the team. So don't discount team achievements and accomplishments and whatever, especially if there was an award behind it or a metric or stuff like that. In addition, let me teach you how to make your bullet points more effective. Oftentimes, I see someone create an achievements section. And while that sometimes works for people, I don't recommend it for most people because a lot of recruiters, a lot of hiring managers want to know which position did you get that achievement in. So which specific job did you get that achievement in? Did you get those numbers in or whatever? So the majority of your bullet points, or as much as possible, should try to be achievement driven, metric driven, or stuff like that. And worst case, if you're struggling, you can still do a couple job responsibility, job duty type bullets, but try to quantify it, try to put a number with it, try to put the dollar amount of the industry that you're in, or the dollar amount of revenue or cost savings that your company had. So there's always ways to incorporate some of that. In addition, try to use the following format. This format was popularized by Google. The format is accomplished X by doing Y, which resulted in Z. Again, accomplished X by doing Y, which resulted in Z. Notice you're not leading with the duty. You're actually leading with the most impressive part. You're leading with a number, a metric, an achievement, an award, something like that. You want to lead with an action verb whenever possible. So by doing Y, which resulted in Z. Let me give you a specific example. So instead of just saying manage projects, you could say delivered 12 projects, 10% under budget, saving $50,000, or manage projects, delivered 12 projects, 10% under budget, saving $50,000 company-wide. All right. Much more clear about how you manage projects, much more clear about the results that you got. I know it can be kind of overwhelming to try to do that for all of your bullet points, especially for those of you that struggle whether you have accomplishments or not. But try to have at least 2, if not 3 of your bullet points for each role be focused on the accomplishment. The next guideline I would give you for your ultimate resume blueprints is focus on relevance. This can be really hard. Like it seems like, well, Mike, isn't all of it relevant? No, not necessarily. Is what you're putting on your resume, is each sentence, is each phrase, is each role even, because you might have 20 years of experience and you're like, ooh, which stuff do I put on? Which stuff do I not put on? You want to say, for the specific job that I am applying for, does this help make the argument that I'm a great fit for this role? Does this help make the argument that I'm a great fit for this role? If it doesn't, especially if you don't have a lot of white space on your resume, you might want to consider deleting it so you can spend more time on the stuff that is relevant. So anything irrelevant, especially if it's 15 years or more old, unless it's highly impressive or unless it's extremely relevant or unless it's communicating an argument that's not already communicated elsewhere in your resume, it's probably in your best interest to remove it, shorten it, streamline it, something like that. Do you have bullet points for some of the jobs that aren't really making a strong argument? You're better off having 2 or 3 relevant bullet points than 5 or 7 bullet points, and some of them aren't making the argument. The reason why that's especially important is, especially for the first pass of the resume, when that recruiter or that hiring manager is reading it for the first time, they're tending to read it fast, sometimes in as little as 4 to 6 seconds. And if you have lots of irrelevant stuff that's not making your argument, they might accidentally read the irrelevant stuff on your resume instead of the stuff that's relevant and that's really going to make the argument. So sometimes less is more. Sometimes including extra stuff is not to your advantage. That's a little bit of an art and a science, and you might need to consult multiple people and get feedback from people in your field, or hire a resume professional or a career coach to help you out with that. Nothing wrong with doing that. I did that earlier in my career and it was money well spent. So to, start to wrap up this topic, your resume, every space on your resume, every line on your resume is prime real estate. Is every paying rent? Is every line having a positive impact? I'm going to move on to resume formatting. Resume formatting matters more than you think, but a lot of people are making the mistake of over formatting. So let me give you some examples on what I mean by formatting and over formatting. Some people have far too many colors, graphics. Even if your resume looks fairly simple, you still might be making the mistake of italicizing too much stuff. You might be bolding too much stuff. If you're bolding more than a few things, then you're not really emphasizing anything in particular. You're actually creating sort of a white noise, a busyness, if you will, that can actually distract people and slow them down from finding information. If you're going to add extra formatting, bolding, italics, underlining, make sure that you're only doing it on stuff that you really want to or need to emphasize. So let me give you a really easy example that almost everybody does. If you are bolding or capitalizing or underlining the name of the companies that you've worked with, but they're all companies people have never heard of, and the company that you're applying to has never heard of them, then you're putting emphasis on something that's not helping you. So I would rather, if you've worked for a bunch of no-name small companies, nothing wrong with that. Some of you might even prefer that. Some of my best employers have been small companies, but we don't want to emphasize that for people, because then they're going to be like, well, like, what's going on with this company? Are they relevant to me? And you're going to spend a lot of time in the interview, if you even get an interview at all, talking about something that's really not about why you're qualified or why you would be amazing at the job or stuff like that. Clean, simple formatting wins way more than you think you would. There's this trend, and it's not your fault because it's confusing. Canva has made this mistake for you. A bunch of companies that supposedly specialize in resumes are like, hey, we'll create a resume for you for $20 or $100, and we'll give you this fancy graphical template or whatever. However, a lot of these companies were founded by people that were not recruiters, that did not do a lot of hiring, and they created a bunch of templates that add a bunch of formatting that's actually distracting from the content. So a couple reasons why this is not to your advantage. The extra formatting distracts from the content. Content is king when it comes to your resume. What you accomplished, what your skills are. The impact that you're going to be able to have in the role. And sometimes the extra formatting, especially if there's extra colors or images or whatever, it might initially look good, but it's actually taking space away that could have been more space for you to better articulate why you should have the job or why you're great at a certain duty, or articulating the achievement in a better way. My recommendation is that you don't use templates from Canva. You hire a resume company or order a resume through a website that has a complicated yet attractive looking resume, and that you stick to something that's one or two colors maximum. So primarily black and white, maybe one additional color that highlights, your name and your sections or whatever, if you really want and need some color. There's a reason why black and white formats are still popular today. It's not that no one had the idea to be colorful. It's not that no one had the idea to use images. That idea has been around for at least 20 years. But the reason why it hasn't caught on and become more common is because it's doing the content a disservice. Some of you are thinking, well, Mike, what template should I even use? So I sort of described what it might look like. If you're having trouble finding a template that you think's close, you could do one of two things. You can either Google Harvard resume, and you can get Harvard's resume template. And the main difference between a Harvard resume template and the template anyone can use is some of you are no longer a student, no longer a recent graduate. And so you're going to take the education section and you're going to move it to the bottom of your resume. So that's the main difference. My other recommendation for you, if you don't want to use the Harvard resume template, is pick the largest or most successful college or university near your metropolitan area, even if you never went to college, even if you never went to university, and Google UCLA resume template. These a lot of these career centers at these universities have asked recruiters what format they like. Now, I will say that this is a starting place for you. If you have a really bad template or you haven't updated your template in 20 years or whatever, it's not going to be a perfect fit because there's no one template that works for everyone. If you are a technically inclined person, if you're like an engineer or a software developer, then your sections are going to be slightly different than someone else's sections. If you're a non-technical person, you're not going to emphasize technical skills and you're going to emphasize something different. But at least this gets you moving in the right direction. All right. A couple things, additional things regarding fonts. I recommend you don't get too cute with your fonts, but for those of you that really want to stand out, this is bonus points. Consider doing a slightly different font. So in my opinion, the two most common fonts we use in the workplace are probably Arial and Times New Roman. Now, if you use Arial or Times New Roman on your resume, awesome, better than using something extremely unique that's hard to read. However, I would invite you to consider using something slightly different but similar so that when someone compares your resume to someone else's or they're reading through hundreds and hundreds of resumes, this is going to be likely to stand out a little bit more if you use a slightly different font. So I would recommend use my two favorite fonts to use because not a lot of people use them are Garamond, and Georgia. Garamond and Georgia. And if you feel more comfortable sticking with Arial or Times New Roman, you're more than welcome to do that. All right. So we already talked about no graphics or minimal graphics. The only exception to that would be if you are a graphic designer and you are someone who completely deals with images and you feel it's demonstrating your expertise on your resume, then I could see a situation where you do that. But you still probably want to have a resume that's primarily text-based as well, especially if you are applying online and uploading your resume online, because most resume technologies, so some of you know that as an ATS, or an applicant tracking system. Many applicant tracking systems have very bare bones technology, and they can't read resumes that have a lot of graphics in them, or they can't read them well, or it makes it more difficult for it to read accurately. So, which also for those of you complaining about, oh man, I upload my resume and I have to implement stuff manually, that's part of the reason why, is because when it's uploaded manually, they might be missing information that they want for the background check. It might be putting the information in different sections than the order they prefer. So I know it's a headache, but network in and don't apply online as much and find other ways to get in if you want to avoid duplicating work and stuff like that. Probably goes without saying, this is a general rule of thumb. There are always exceptions to the rule. If you have under 10 years of relevant experience, you're probably better served with a one-page resume. If you have over 10 years of experience, you're probably better served with a two-page resume. There are exceptions. At the age of 24 or the age of possibly even the age of 22, I had a lot of experience before I graduated from university. And so I had a heck of a lot of experience to sell. And so I had a two-page resume at a very young age. That's going to be the exception more than the rule. There are some of you that are changing careers, or you worked a lot of blue-collar jobs or retail jobs or whatever, and now you're applying for white-collar jobs, and a lot of your experience might no longer be relevant. And so even if you're older and more experienced, you might still benefit from having a one-page job. So it's not just about the years you've been alive and the years you've been working. It's about the number of years of relevant experience. And if you're on a one or a two pager and you're not including a bunch of fluff, if you're being concise or brief, then it's probably the right resume for you. If you're not leaving anything off important that will help make the argument, then it's probably the right length for you. So hopefully that was helpful. I would love for you to reach out to me on social media or otherwise and let me know which tips you like and which tips you don't like. So now we're going to talk about keyword optimization, a very popular topic. There's a lot of misinformation out there from some creators, from some content creators who seem like they know what they're talking about when it comes to job search, but really they just decided to start creating some content and they have some strong opinions and they don't have any recruiting experience, or they have barely any recruiting experience. And they worked in a very specialized field that really didn't apply to everybody else. Or they're regurgitating information that they saw elsewhere that got a lot of likes, and they don't realize it's not really accurate information. So you will hear a lot of phrases like beating the ATS or getting past the ATS. And a lot of that content is actually inaccurate or flat out wrong, because eventually you are going to be in the ATS no matter what. Like, you can't avoid it. You can't beat it. You can temporarily try to go around it, which I do recommend, but you can't beat it per se. You can't get past it completely, because really all the ATS is it's a database that stores everyone that's applied. It stores everyone that's applied. So, and there's also a big misconception out there that your resume is getting filtered out due to AI or artificial intelligence, which I'll tell you, also misinformation, because I talk to hundreds and hundreds of recruiters a year, and less than 10% of companies are using AI in their hiring process yet. And 10% is probably ambitious. It's probably lower than that. And so if you're reading content from someone that says, hey, like AI is filtering you out, they probably are making it up, or they're basing it on what they read elsewhere, and they're flat out incorrect. Now, with that said, there could be some knockout questions. There could be keywords that they're looking for that are going to impact whether you move on or not. So should you analyze a bunch of job descriptions and figure out, hey, what are the keywords in my industry that seem to come up a lot? Absolutely. What are the job duties or skills that seem to come up frequently in the job description? And can I make an argument that I have them? Put those in your resume. Are there keywords that I don't use on a daily basis, but at my company or my industry they essentially did the same thing. They just used a slightly different word. Absolutely. Like, put that onto your resume. But if you're just putting a whole bunch of if you're just putting a whole bunch of keywords, none of which you've actually done before or know anything about on your resume, you might get a couple more interviews, but most people can tell what you're doing when you're trying to manipulate the system. So make sure that whatever keywords you include, you actually have researched or know something about, not stuff that you actually, if not stuff that you actually have experience working with. The other thing I would encourage you to do, and this is how I recommend doing the keyword exercise, is go out and find 5 job descriptions that are similar and analyze all 5. So I would analyze all 5 with ChatGPT, but I would also manually read through them one after another and say, hey, what do most of these have in common? Which keywords, what skills seem to be coming up over and over again? And then this really important distinction: what phrases, what duties, what responsibilities seem to come up over and over again? And can I notice any trends in the language? And if so, if I'm seeing like a similar phrase pop up across 3 different job descriptions, that's a sign that if I talk in that way, it's more likely going to be to resonate with the hiring manager. Now, one quick distinction on this. I don't want you to find 5 completely different jobs and try to have a resume that's all things to all people. That is a mistake. If you try to have a resume that caters to 5 completely different jobs, it's going to come off as not specialized. It's going to come off as not relevant, that whole relevancy thing that we talked about. So when I say pick 5 job descriptions, I mean, if you're a marketing manager, find 5 marketing manager jobs that are similar. And not all marketing manager jobs are similar. Some specialize in email, some specialize in SEO, some specialize in social media. So you get the idea. So I could give the same examples for just about any role or specific position. You want 5 jobs that are similar. Doesn't matter what role. It doesn't matter what role you're applying for. All right. So another thing that I would add, and we need to be careful about it because we don't want to be accused of keyword stuffing. And I'll be the first one to admit that not every recruiter loves what I'm about to say to you. But what I will say is it works temporarily and it increases the chances you get in the door, but you still got to be able to back it up in the interview. And here's what I mean. I do recommend a small, not a large, I recommend a small skills section around the skills that are most important to the job. So some people call this key skills. Some people call this core competencies. And I recommend you keep it to 12 or less. And these are 1 to 3 words, preferably 1 to 2 word skills maximum. But they're hard skills or technical skills for the job that clarify that are skills that are really cared about. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to include skills on there that you're not strong at or that you're not knowledgeable about or whatnot. If you're not really strong in 12 and they're not all relevant, it's better to have 9 skills or 6 skills. This does not have to be your only skill section. This is just the most important ones. If there's other random skills like software programs or whatever, where you're not sure that it's that important, then create an additional skill section towards the bottom of your resume that you can include a little bit more space on, but you're not emphasizing it at the top. So for those of you that are more technically inclined, the engineers, the software developers in the room, the data scientists, your skill section or core competency section is going to be primarily technical skills. And you may or may not label it technical skills. People that are not in one of those buckets, you don't want to emphasize technical skills. If you're in a non-techie role, you might include those towards the bottom. All right. So let's talk about some common resume killers. They're small things. They're things that people do frequently. Avoid typos, avoid bad grammar. Now, I know it sucks, especially if you're in a role where you don't have to be a great writer or whatever. But your resume is being compared to hundreds and hundreds of other people that are applying. So unfortunately, typos and bad grammar are inappropriately judged harshly, regardless of what role that you're in. So find a friend who is a native English speaker and have them go through your resume, not to give you random feedback, but have them go through your resume just looking for typos, just looking for misspellings, and just looking for grammar. Maybe some formatting issues, but you don't want the same person that's giving you feedback on job duties to be the person that does your typos and whatever, because they're not going to realize how important the typos and bad grammar is. So you want someone who's just going to look at that. So that doesn't even need to be someone in your field. The other thing I would stay away from is long paragraphs. So the only part of the resume that should be longer than 1 or 2 lines is if you choose to have a summary section. And even then, I recommend your summary section be no more than 5 lines. 5 lines, not 5 sentences, 5 lines. So the parts underneath your work experience are going to be primarily bullets. The only exception is if you have more than 7 bullets, especially for your older jobs, then you might have a brief paragraph that covers some of that stuff. just to create a little variety in your resume. But if you do the paragraph bullet point format for one job, then you need to do it for all jobs, or at least all jobs within a given section. So, because they're also looking for consistency. Inconsistency can be a resume killer, especially if you're in a role that requires someone to be detail oriented, because they're going to be like, well, like, why is this different? And people that are confused, people that can't immediately get their answer, it's just easier for them to move on to another resume. So we want to minimize confusion, mistakes as much as possible. All right. Other things to stay away from, and some of this is old stuff, but some people are still doing it. You do not need to put references available upon request. They know if they want references, they need to ask you. So also, if you do have references, you don't need to list them on your resume. They will ask for those when they need those. Now, this last part, because we do have an international audience, but again, I primarily coach people around job search success in the United States and Canada. And so, but check the rules in your country. But in the United States, we don't want to include age, marital status. And here's one that's relatively new in the past 10 to 15 years in the United States. It's commonplace to no longer put your full address onto your resume. That's for a couple reasons. That's so you don't get discriminated against based on your address. That's so you don't get discriminated against based on your commute time. And that's also so that you have some data privacy, especially if you're posting your resume places. We don't want people to know exactly where you live. Now, that's not putting your full address on the list. However, even if you want to work remotely, they still need to know what major metropolitan area that you live in. I know some of you hate that. Some of you are, trying to get hired in cities that you want to relocate to or whatever. They want to know, even for remote roles, what country are you in? Because maybe they're not set up to hire people from your country. They want to know what US state you're in, because believe it or not, they cannot automatically hire people from any state. They might not be set up legally and tax-wise to hire people from your US state. Also, even if they're set up to hire people from anywhere, they still might want to know what time zone you're in, if you have the ability to come into a local office or whatnot. So don't try to get away from hiding your metropolitan area and country. It's actually pretty critical for them making decisions. So if you have questions about that, please reach out to me on social media, especially any of my posts regarding resumes or CVs. And if you have a question that's specific to your state or your country, please let me know that as well. So I'm going to start to wrap up the episode for this week, but I have decided to do a part 3. I have decided to do an ultimate resume blueprint part 3, because there's a couple more things that I would like to cover with you, and maybe cover some user questions. Some of you have submitted questions to me via social media, but let me end with some action items for today. So 1, choose one specific job title to focus on. Even if you're interested in 3 potential jobs, which is the job that either is your ideal dream job, if you have time, or if you're in financial constraints or you need the job search to go a little bit more quickly, you don't have 9 or 12 months to find your dream job, then I would recommend choosing the job that you are most likely to get that moves you in the direction towards your goals, and do all of the analysis that I talked about earlier for that one job. So for those of you targeting multiple positions, you might have slightly different versions of your resume that make arguments for different positions. But if you write your resume for one type of job and then switch, the argument's not going to be as strong than if you had a specific focus going into it. And that's a major problem for a lot of people. You're basing off something you did 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, and some of that stuff is not relevant for what you want now. Alrighty, so let me double check my list. All right. So as you are looking at your resume and figuring out which of this stuff you want to implement, ask yourself the question, can a complete stranger who doesn't know you, can they tell from reading your resume quickly what you're applying for and the top 3 reasons why to hire you, even if they're not in your field? If they can't, then you would probably benefit from making some improvements to your resume, particularly the top 25% of your resume. So rewrite it to address that. Like, make it clear what job title you're applying for or what area you're applying for. Don't be generic or vague. And another potential action item is audit your resume for results, relevance, keywords. It's hard to do all of this stuff in one sitting, especially if you've been neglecting your resume for years or even a year. So the reason why this is easier for some people than you is some people update their resume a little bit every quarter, every 3 months, just accomplish something, put it on your resume. Now, I get it. You can't go back in time, but that's part of the reason why this is such a big project now. So be compassionate with yourself and do one of these at a time. So audit your resume for results, relevance, and keywords. And those are probably 3 separate actions. Another great action item is rewrite 1 bullet point today or within the next 24 hours using the XYZ formula. So get a model of the best version of yours and then use that model as an example to go back to that model and use that example for other particular positions and work your way up to at least 2 or 3 accomplishment or metric related bullets per position. If you don't do it in one setting, that's fine. But if you're not getting interviews, you got to keep going back and making small incremental improvements to your resume until you do have all of this stuff. So another potential action item for you. And again, I'm giving you options to choose from. I don't expect you to do this all at once. That's a recipe for overwhelmment. Have someone else, preferably a hiring manager or recruiter in your fields, in your industry, if possible, skim your resume for 8 seconds and give feedback. If you're a student or a recent graduate, you can be going on LinkedIn and looking for people that graduated from your school and reaching out to them and getting your feedback. If you've been in the workforce for a couple of years, you can be reaching out to ex-coworkers, ex-hiring managers, or whatever. So there's very little excuse for not being able to find someone unless you were just horrible at your job. The only exception would be some people that are starting their careers that did not yet get a degree, in which case you're going to have to work a little bit harder, go to some networking events, go to some professional events, ask for referrals a lot more to find people to give you this. Choose one of these actions and get started on it, and then come back and listen to part 3 of the Ultimate Resume Bullet Print. Please do me a favor, help me get this information in front of people so that they can lead lives and have great jobs that pay them the money they deserve. Please consider following the show, rating it 5 stars, and sharing the podcast or sharing the show with at least one person. Even if they don't take you up on it, it helps us spread the word. So thanks, everybody. I'm Mike Tomasello with the Career Success Secret Show, and let's up-level our careers together, and I'll see you on the next show.